All right, Danielle, we're back. And I remember that episode, Weed Mom, we talked about with your book. It's
Yeah,
wonderful. So thank you for coming back. Really appreciate it.
thanks for having me. I love to chat about cannabis, as you know.
Yeah. And a lot of people I know talking about cannabis. I feel like my consumption habits have definitely increased since we talked.
Yeah.
But where are you at with your book? Just to get an update and everything. And how's life been for you with, talking about your book and different appearances, stuff like that?
Yeah, it's been busy. Life has really picked up. It's been fun, interesting, kind of a whirlwind. Yeah, I do get invited to speak and go on podcasts, and I've gotten to travel a little bit for cannabis this last year or so since travel has opened up a bit more. I'm actually leading a tour, hopefully, as long as we get enough people signed up, we're getting close to the wire. But at the end of this month, I'm leading a Colombia cannabis tour. Really, really excited for
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Crazy. So what happens on this tour? Like,
So we're staying at a private finca, like a country estate, basically, that's in this gorgeous, like really emerald green environment. Tropical fruits, really really good food. We're going to tour a cannabis farm there. It's decriminalized. There's a medical market. There are commercial grows, so we're going to do that. Tour a cannabis farm, get tastings, get lots of info about cultivation and terroir of the cannabis and all that
yeah.
cool stuff. We're also going to tour some coffee farms, coffee plantations, and do tastings there. Do some cultural activities, some private yoga, massage. It's really going to be like a self care extravaganza.
I mean, it sounds really nice. I mean, how high will you be on this trip? I mean, it's like,
Well, it's all the cannabis you can smoke is included. So yeah, or eat.
or eat. Yeah, I'm definitely more of an eater, but yeah, it sounds really interesting. So you talk about speaking, like, what are the topics you're speaking on related to cannabis these days?
Yeah, it's a lot of the cannabis and parenting angle that people want to
Mm,
talk to me about, honestly. So it's like, cannabis and parenting as a whole, how to talk to kids about cannabis, ways to navigate this new marketplace, just education in general. And I think that people are still looking for that, like, stamp of approval. Like it's okay if you're a parent, especially a mom.
yeah.
And you consume. So we're still having a lot of these just sort of destigmatizing conversations, and also how to in broad terms, because of course everyone is different, as your milligram, your
Yeah.
sweet spot for edibles is going to be very different from the next person, and same with all the other modes of consumption. So education and getting people to really understand their own system is a lot of what I do.
What's some of the, I mean, maybe this is the wrong word. What's some of the reprogramming for what people think about cannabis and parenting, or just some of the myths or misconceptions they've had going into it, chatting with you?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of misinformation. I mean, for basically 100 years of prohibition, there was a concerted misinformation campaign, right? And so people still believe that, first of all, it's irresponsible for parents, that like there's really only one way to consume cannabis, and you just get high and then you can't parent. And that's absolutely not the case.
uh,
Right? They
yeah.
imagine, like, if you're going to compare it to alcohol, they think that anyone who engages with cannabis is going to be like drunk, like they just had a bottle of
Yeah.
Everclear or something. They're going to be that high.
Oof.
Whereas, right? I mean, there's such a spectrum, and that's a big message that I have. Is like there are even non-psychoactive or very very subtly psychoactive ways to consume, and then all the way to the other side of the spectrum to very very high consumption, right?
Yeah.
And so finding your sweet spot, and especially as a parent, getting to know your body, your response to cannabinoids is really important, because we want to be safe. We want to be able to respond to situations as needed, of course. But I have utter faith and confidence that we can do that as cannabis parents, just
Yeah.
with a little bit of education and the right products.
So how do you now I'm thinking about this question, that maybe you get this question is, parents may drink around their children or things of that nature, and it feels like, whatever. But then the same parents who may ingest cannabis or smoke it feel like they can't say anything that they're doing this. Like there's like these two different rules. How do you sort that out with people?
Yeah, I mean, the stigma is just so strong, and it being illegal for so long and
Yeah.
still remaining illegal in so many places definitely contributes to that. And people feeling like, their jobs could be at stake, or even like their, parental custody, things like that. Depends on where you live, depends on,
Yeah.
lots of things. So it's tricky. But I mean, generally speaking, I stand up for normalizing, not, this doesn't mean normalizing use for young people, but just
Hmm.
normalizing that it's for adults and it's here, it's around. These are the things you need to know about it. Just like, if someone wanted to responsibly educate their kids about alcohol, if they
Right.
drink alcohol in their home, they would make it clear that this is an adult beverage, right? This is not for
Yeah.
kids, and why, and how it, could make a kid feel if they were to have it. So, it is tricky. It really, we're in this situation where just state by state, almost community by community,
Yeah.
people are in different situations regarding this. But I do think if it's safe for you, you should educate, especially if you're a consumer yourself. It's we need to change this narrative.
Most definitely. So, I mean, obviously, over these past couple of years since we chatted, I'm sure you've gone deeper and deeper into this industry. What has gotten better about it, and what has maybe been disappointing as you've dove deeper into it?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's really a lot. So access is improving, generally speaking. More states are legalizing, whether it's for medical or for adult use, and or everything at once, which happens once in a while. um, and so then definitely there's more entrepreneurship. There are just more ways for people to access cannabis. Also, and this is a really big subject in of itself, but there's this proliferation of new cannabinoids that are not entirely regulated, right? That are some of them come from the plant, some of them are sort of synthesized from the
Yeah.
plant, and there isn't legislation around this yet. So access to those is also increasing. It's good and it's bad at the same time, I think, because
Yeah.
access is a good thing. I think for cannabinoids that can actually help people, help them, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, even. But there are a lot of like fly by night companies out there, a
Yeah.
lot of shady products, untested, not lab tested products. And so, you know, it, education is even more important now than it was before, because it used to be it was just all the same, basic substances that you're getting is delta 9 THC.
Right.
Now you have delta 10, you have delta 8, you have HHC, THCO, THCP. It's like there's so many. And there's a lot to learn. So I think that access is increasing. It's good and it's bad at the same time. I think that entrepreneurship is still really, it's a really rich area for entrepreneurship. Lots of new companies, lots of new, folks trying their hand at the business. It can be tough. It can be a really tough market though. So, some people are going to do well and others aren't. It's just we're in that startup phase.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people that they're concerned a little bit with kind of how the cannabis industry is going. And essentially, obviously, there's still a lot of like you have to have essentially a cash business,
Yeah.
which is annoying. Not having a checking account and stuff, and there's just dangers that people robbing stores because they know there's cash there and stuff like that
Yeah.
for it. And I compare it to it's like we're seeing this cannabis, the rise of cannabis and psychedelics, very similar. And psychedelics is looking at cannabis like, how is this going, and what can we learn from how this is rolled out? Because when you have this state by state thing, it gets kind of weird
It
with it,
gets really weird.
right? I mean, what do you feel about that
Yeah.
kind of this state by state adoption or non-adoption of cannabis, whether it's medical or recreational or all?
Well, I think some forward movement is better than none.
Yeah,
So the fact that, the only way I think we were getting there is for individual states to decide, right? So
yeah,
Colorado and Washington and, those early states definitely showed the way. California with medical, but that was in 96. So, I think that it had to happen that way just because our federal system is so clunky.
that's a nice way to say it. I mean, that's like one of the most nice ways to say that.
I can use other words,
There's
but
many other words that are not so nice. Yeah.
no, for sure. So there's that, but then it does lead to this completely, patchwork sort of situation where people have wildly different levels of access, wildly different, consequences or lack thereof for consuming. So, it's a weird place to be. And also, social media is still very unfriendly to cannabis. And, so
In
yeah,
what
yeah.
ways? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, cannabis accounts get deleted regularly, even accounts with like 100,000
What?
followers just deleted out of nowhere. Sometimes you can appeal to get it back. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. If you write out the entire word cannabis, for instance, on Instagram, flagged, your
Mm,
account either could get deleted or you'll be shadow banned, which means that your account is there, but nobody can really find it. They don't show it to anybody. The algorithm doesn't push out your
yeah,
content. So yeah, there's so many restrictions. LinkedIn is a little bit more friendly to cannabis actually
yeah.
right now, interestingly enough. But in terms of like reaching kind of the Canna-Curious or the consumers, Instagram is really the place where I've found the most folks. And it's just tough. You have to use code words, you have to use emojis. Yeah.
What is this? A
You can't,
speakeasy from the 20s or something? It's like,
I
it's like,
know.
what's the
You can't
passcode?
talk about what you're actually talking about.
Yeah. It's a whole thing. Like a lot of industries, like whenever I do episodes about sex work or just, anything like that, I mean, YouTube just crushes me for it, man. They like give me a community strike. I'm like, I don't understand this. Like I see other sites that's all they talk about is sex and they seem to be fine. Like I do one episode. It feels like there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's like, what are we
I know.
protecting here? I mean, kids are going to look at stuff anyways. It's not like who are we protecting? I don't understand. Like, I mean, there's violence everywhere online and stuff. And
I know. And
I,
especially educational content that could actually be
yeah,
useful for people,
right.
right?
Yeah. It just seems like, how do you pick and choose what is appropriate or not? I didn't know that about cannabis. I thought that wasn't an issue, but that's interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
well, I think it's because of the federal illegal status, and the banking issues, the fact
Yeah.
that a lot of banks take issue with, cannabis commerce, and also for Instagram specifically because it's a platform geared to all ages, or supposedly
Yeah.
like, even though that's very problematic for
It's
youth to
definitely
use,
problematic.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. So, do you foresee in the very near future legalization federally, or is this like a fight that's just going to keep kind of being gridlocked? You know?
That is the question. And I've changed my mind a few times on it. I don't even know where I am right now. So earlier, well, actually, I think it was end of last year. It was right before the midterms. That's when it was. Biden announced, you probably saw it, there's,
Mhm.
some pardoning for federal offenses, nonviolent offenses, including cannabis. And he announced that they want to look at rescheduling or descheduling cannabis. Now, those two things could mean very different things. Descheduling would be a wonderful thing, I think, for the industry.
Yeah.
Rescheduling from Schedule 1, where it's currently at, to 2, 3, or 4 would actually would give the pharmaceutical companies control, purview over the cannabis industry. And it could really mess with, the industry that's out there already, and the
Right.
entrepreneurs that have risked everything. So I think that there's interest, there's movement. There are several bills still sitting in Congress, and even some Republican-led ones.
Yeah.
To say,
Interesting.
yeah. So the Republican-led ones tend to be focused on commerce, and the Democrat-led ones tend to be focused on equity and figuring out how to possibly bring those together to get a bill passed. Like I'm optimistic it could happen in the next couple of years, but I think it's not the top priority for most lawmakers, quite
Yeah.
obviously. And we're dealing with so many issues in our country. So I'm not optimistic that they're like, yeah, let's do this now.
Yeah. Do you know what the weird thing is? Does anybody know what the top priority is, anyways? It's like, I'm just
Well,
sitting there.
yeah,
I'm
it
like, well,
depends on
what
who you
is that?
ask.
I'm not even sure what that is. Like, can somebody convey this to me? It's like, it just sounds like a bunch of, squabbling about stuff. And it's like that has nothing to do with actually helping people. I mean, that's what always gets me. We're like, well, what is the priority? Because thing is like weed should not be some partisan thing, man. It's like, when people smoke weed or ingest edibles that you would never think do it. They're
For
just
sure.
hiding it. It's like, and anybody, that's why I'm like, for me in my life, I just don't care anymore. Now, listen, I have flexibility because I have a job where I don't get tested. I own my own businesses. But then on that end, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to hide this. I'm going to be like, listen, in some ways, it's a responsibility of people who are doing well to talk about, hey, listen, I'm fine. I'm doing fine. I'm successful. And I'm also, responsibly ingesting this. Like,
Yeah, I
do you
agree.
think I'm a loser? Like, seriously, I like to like push people that
Push
way and be like,
people.
you
Yeah.
think I'm a loser? Because like I seem to be doing just fine. Like, you need to change the narrative in your
Yeah.
mind of this person isn't in a back alley. I'm not in an alley like going, hey man, you got anything for me? It's like I'm in my house watching TV and lining up snacks. I'm like,
Exactly.
come on.
I think you're totally right. Is the more people who, are uh, successful, doing their work in the
Yeah,
world, healthy and happy, for the most part. I mean, all of us are not every single day
of
that way, but
course. Yeah.
showing ourselves as just everyday people who are cannabis consumers, I think is really, really helpful for changing that narrative. Because for a long time, I think the most visible cannabis consumers were, sort of um, the ones who didn't care, I guess, if
Yes.
everybody knew,
Yeah.
right?
Right. It's kind of this whole reefer madness propaganda. And oh, you are doing this and you must like you're not motivated to do anything.
Right.
I mean, listen, when I take an edible, I really don't want to do anything, but I'm like trying not to do anything. It's not like type of thing. But I think, the user has been totally misaligned, like who does this and stuff. And I think people have always known this. It's just that marketing is powerful, and
Mm.
pop culture marketing. I remember those commercials from way back in the day. All these different, this is your brain on drugs. Oh, the kid who's smoking weed and he's just, his life is a mess. It's like, man, like, how about tell both sides of the story? That may not even be a true story you're talking about. It's like crazy.
Right. And those lies essentially, or one-sided information that was
Yeah.
presented, it makes kids distrust the message,
Yeah.
distrust the dare program
Yep.
and what parents say about drugs in general. And I mean, I have a 13 and a 10-year-old now, so I know that I need to talk about these things, and there's a lot more than cannabis out there.
Yep.
So I want to give them accurate information so that they trust me,
Yeah.
because if you tell your kids, you'll become a brain dead loser if you smoke weed once,
God.
and then they do one day and they realize that was, total lie. Like, there, what else was I lied to about,
Yeah.
and there are truly dangerous substances out
Of
there. So I
course.
want them to know, the differences.
For sure, like anything, it's the education, right? And it's not like you're showing up and you're just a horrible parent and you're just like going to a PTA meeting high off your ass. I mean, it's like, no. I'm like, but that's what the marketing wants you to believe, that you just be pretty bad at most things in your life. And I believed that too for a long time, way back in the day. But I was just socialized into it and no one talked to me about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a lot of things. If somebody doesn't tell you and gives you really good information, you make up the void. Or
Yeah.
someone fills the void with other information that you just start going, yeah, that must be what it is.
Right. Right. You just sort of take it in, and that was the dominant paradigm for a very long time. And when in reality, I know a lot of people who consume a lot of cannabis and are
Like a lot.
very
Yeah.
productive and are very motivated and are, living their best lives, to use that
I know definitely a lot of people are consuming way more than I do. And they're crushing it, man. I'm just like, and actually, and funny, I think the more cannabis I've consumed in my life, the less I want to drink alcohol. Because you start realizing the difference, and you're
Hmm.
like, I just feel better on this. Like, and
Yeah.
I think that's kind of an effect that a lot of alcohol drinkers don't think about. Because I know a lot of people who just drink alcohol, and they're like, I'm like, I don't know, man. I feel like the thing you're doing a lot, it's not, it's very hard on you. Like, it's very difficult. I think we're learning that even more. But I just think it's like we just gotta talk to each other about this. Is this is like it's actually at a ridiculous stage right now, in my opinion. It's like, really? Like, why are we
I know.
fighting so hard against something? How about fight against fentanyl? Like, there's some crazy stuff killing people like instantly.
Yeah.
Like, how about that attention, you know?
Yeah. I mean, or guns.
Right. Right. Oh, well, no, we don't care about that. Yeah. But weed, you can't do. Come
Weed,
on.
right? Oh my gosh, some kids might get hungry and want to watch
Yeah.
a movie at home.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the violence. Yeah. I mean, I literally don't want to move a finger. I don't want to do anything. I definitely don't want to be violent. That's for sure. I'm like,
I know. I absolutely. It's like anyone pushing that narrative has never had an experience with cannabis, I don't think.
no, no. I think it's just part of this whole misinformation aspect. And it's more dangerous than ever to fall into things that are not true
Yeah.
with that. And we have to be very diligent about what our kids are looking at, what we're looking at, and get the information. Now, do we know if there's more research on cannabis happening now? I know, than there was in the past.
Yeah, there is. And also, there's more research looking for benefit instead of looking for harm, which is what they
Okay.
were doing for so long,
All
right?
right.
For the most part, many of those studies were funded by NIDA, National
Mm,
Institute, for Drug Abuse, or just organizations that were really motivated to find something wrong with it. So yeah, there is absolutely more research going on. Really interesting research in mental health, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and digestive issues. Like
mhm.
different cannabinoids have many different properties, from antifungal to anti-cancer.
Right.
So yeah, I mean the well-established uses of cannabis, I think, are still being investigated to some degree, like nausea, epilepsy, muscle spasms, but
Yeah.
we know that and pain, we know it works for those things. But there's this whole other realm of mental health and digestive health and also autoimmune disease that
Yeah.
cannabis has good potential for. So yeah, there's interesting stuff coming out.
It feels like, much like with psychedelics, that kind of the way in is always through, like how this treats different diseases, or
Mm-hmm.
PTSD, depression, different things like that. But we don't spend enough, and those are important. But what are your thoughts about spending time discussing like usage for people that are generally well? They're not suffering from these things. Like Michael Pollan talks about this in his book, like, this kind of drug use or whatever use for well people. And then
Right.
it's almost like we push back on that. Well, you seem to be okay. Why would you need this? You know?
Yeah, I know. That is really interesting. Let me just turn off my my fireplace really quick.
No worries, no worries. Yeah.
I'm about to roast in here.
It's getting hot in here.
It's getting hot in here. It's cold or it's hot in this office because it's
Yeah.
like an add-on. Anyway, so I feel like that's where I'm at, and that's where a lot of people that I talk to are at, sort of wellness uses. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, I do use it for pain with migraines, and I think that it helps me physically in some ways, but I don't have like a chronic disease necessarily that
Yeah.
I'm medicating for with cannabis. It's really about like, yes, taking someone who's pretty well and healthy
Yeah.
and and like lifting up a little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
sort of bringing that baseline up. And I think that a lot of people are consuming in that way. Do we see research on that? Not so much,
Mm.
interestingly. It's more like, you'll see some research on what do casual consumers or, semi-regular consumers, like what's their long-term lung effect or brain effect or things like that, but not so much like how is this enhancing their lives?
Yeah.
It's more anecdotal in that regard, I think.
Do you think there's pushback for that? That people are like, well, this needs to happen because something's happening to you that you need to deal with? Or what's your thoughts about that? Why there's not more research about it?
Well, I mean, I think that we have hangups in our culture about pleasure and
Oh, yes.
right.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sort of Calvinist, Puritan, life is
Mm,
about hard work and sacrifice and thrift and pleasure is suspect. I think that's even though we're also a very consumption oriented culture, I think
yeah.
we have that like dual dual view on it, this like paradoxical, like, yes, indulge and you treat yourself and you deserve
Yeah.
it, but it's also like morally bad somehow, or like,
Mm.
you don't have any self-control or things like that. So, it is hard for people to wrap their minds around something that's like, you already feel good and you just want to feel a little bit better, a little bit
Yeah.
more relaxed, or a little more in tune or open-hearted. Um, However, these types of substances have been used all around the world for a very long time. There's cannabis, there's canna. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mm-mm.
canna.
Mm-mm.
It's a plant it's a succulent from South Africa that has stamina building and focus building, and also more sort of like empathogenic qualities. I've used it. It's actually really cool, and
Okay.
it's legal. It's available. Things like kava and tat and coca, not cocaine, but coca
Yeah.
leaves. Many of these plants have been used by indigenous people all around the world for, again, social lubrication, open-heartedness, and pathogenic uses. It's just, I think our society is kind of sick when it comes to
Yeah.
the way we see it.
That that really resonated with me, the whole pleasure aspect. It's like we're some ways anti-pleasure about it. It's like, well, you have to have something, a chronic issue to make this okay. And
Right.
I think a lot of people pursuing making it legal kind of try to go through that pathway because that's what's more pleasing to people who make the decisions, or to
Mm-hmm.
get larger things. But I think we should spend more time about, people crave altered states of consciousness. They always have. This has been well documented throughout the ages, is that humans have see a tremendous value in altered states of consciousness. Now, there's different versions of that, but we've always had this inclination to change our reality here and
Yes.
there. And this is, I guess, a deeper question is, why do you think that is?
Well, that's interesting. And, Michael Pollan talks about that. And
Yes.
I love reading his thoughts on that. So, altered states of consciousness, from a spiritual perspective, I think that it helps us transcend a little bit. It
Yeah.
helps us connect to the greater mind, the greater consciousness, the greater heart, however you see it. To see past these, like to see past our own nose, right?
Yeah.
um, and I think that having, either peak experiences, euphoric experiences, deep relaxation experiences, they all enhance our ability to just human, to be a
Yeah.
human, right? To interact, to do what we need to do. Like, we need novel experiences. We need, you know, pleasure. Absolutely. So for me, it's like creating a balanced organism, a balanced person means like I want to explore the different states that my mind is capable of, with health and well-being in mind.
Yeah. I think also, like, people, sometimes you get stuck in this wheel, and a lot of life can be very repetitive, and it could feel very monotonous. And it's kind of the concept of going somewhere else on a vacation and stuff. You break up the monotony, or the kind of just, the road you're wearing out all the time in
Yeah.
life, these roles you're playing on a regular basis, whether,
Yeah.
a partner, a spouse, a mother, a father, a sister, brother, all these things. They're good things, they're wonderful things, but sometimes you just crave a different reality, sometimes, even just for a little bit, a couple hours. And I think sometimes we're just too harsh on people for wanting to have that.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I understand, I totally understand the impulse for altered consciousness, and cannabis is the, substance that I use the most for
Yeah.
that. But I alter my consciousness with yoga and with
Yeah,
breath work
exactly.
and with meditation and with exercise. Like, these are things that we've deemed like okay, or, morally upright.
Morally
But
upright. Yeah.
but it's just another tool. Like, if you use only one thing exclusively, like if cannabis was the only thing that I could do to change my mood or my perspective, then I don't think that would be healthy.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's one of a wide array of tools that I have that I think are really, really helpful.
It's interesting you mentioned that, especially with exercise. And this, my area of work, is I've always felt that exercise has been very meditative and mind altering for me. And essentially also because especially when you're doing something that requires a lot of attention with exercise, you start to filter out all these other things that you were thinking about and becomes a very singular, altered experience. And
Mhm.
your breathing, the breath, how your body feels. But we don't deem that to be the right type of or you know, or that's the right type of way to go about it. But these other things, you couldn't possibly be doing these things. And like I don't understand what's the difference. Like
Right. And you're creating endocannabinoids when you're
right.
exercising too. So
Yeah.
it's like that the feeling is really very similar, but cannabis just sort of supplements us a little bit to a little higher higher
There you go. Yeah.
level.
You know, I don't know if you'll think you know this, but I never thought about asking anybody this, but like what's the best experience you've had with cannabis? Like and your thoughts related to that.
Well, so I've had so many insights and creative inspirations
Yeah.
with cannabis. I think that's my favorite way to consume it is actually when I'm sort of turning over a question in my
Mm,
mind or like working on a piece of writing where I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what the next point is. When I have something to mull over, consuming a little bit of cannabis, going on a walk, ideally in nature, but it really could just be in the neighborhood.
yeah.
I've gotten so much good inspiration, and I have my phone with me, and I'll just take voice memos at that
Yeah.
point, and go back and mine those later. So that I think like everyday experiences, it's that. But I will say that I've had deep healing experiences with cannabis too.
Mm,
I've had basically psychedelic experiences where
yeah.
yeah, where I felt and it was like a visualization that was part of it, not hallucination. My eyes were closed, but I could like see in my mind's eye. I was lying down and I could see sort of these like layers of trauma leaving my body,
Yeah.
like wisps of smoke almost, just sort of
Right.
coming up from my physical body and drifting away and joining the energy of the universe so it can
Yeah.
do no harm, basically.
Right. Right.
So and I felt that like on a really deep level and much more whole afterwards. So just like psychedelics, cannabis can go deep.
Yeah, I think so too, especially like for me with edibles has a similar experience depending on when I've done it, the state I'm in for that. I had one particular one where I was like outside of myself. This is with edibles. And I was like okay with it. I was like, "Oh, I don't know who that person is sitting there. Like it's me." I'm like and I was like, not sure who that is. Like, I'm outside of this person. But then, like, I started coming back, oh, that's me, you know? And it's actually, I accepted the fact that I felt disconnected from myself in a good way, that I was able to observe myself outside of me, not being me. And to have that perspective, like to look at this person that way, because it's very difficult to look past your nose and
Mm-hmm.
to like, it's very difficult to like really take an honest look at yourself. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people run away from themselves. They don't want to reflect upon who they actually are, how they exist in the world. It's like, let me just do something else. And I feel that's part of the experience is like really reflecting on who you are, going deep into that.
I agree. And Michael Pollan has this interesting thought that you've probably heard about how like this the substances that help us do that the most are the ones that are the most maligned, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
ones that help us self-reflect and are not about just sort of like numb the feelings or fuel up and get it done. So
yeah.
caffeine, alcohol, benzos, like those are all about
Yeah,
either get it done or numb the f out,
yeah.
right?
Right, right.
Instead of like cannabis and many of these psychedelics, again, like you can use them unmindfully too,
Of
and you can just
course.
use them to tune out, but really like these substances I think help us tune in at a greater level, self-reflect on a greater level,
Yeah.
and they're the ones that have been made illegal.
Crazy, right? You think the thing that's really good for you is what people push hardest against. I mean, what is that? What do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably wrapped up in our systems,
Yeah.
and capitalism and patriarchy and and racism and just
Yeah.
colonialism, like all of that stuff. I think this being suspect of self-reflection, being suspect of, uh, you know, someone who doesn't want to just tune out everything and work hard, be
Yeah.
that cog in the wheel. I think those things are kind of threatening to the system.
The system, I think, fears nonconformity in
Yeah.
a general. It's like, hey, you're being awakened to understanding yourself better. And then when you understand yourself better, you see things around you differently. And then you go, I'm going to choose a different pathway that's not part of the system. And I
Right.
think the general hierarchy of the system does not like that. They want conformity for that. They want good little workers, like
I
fall in
agree.
line. And I think that was a big part of the banning of that movement in the 60s, 70s and stuff is like all these people are awakening to a different reality of America and living. And that was not a thing, especially that time.
Coming out of the 50s.
Yeah. And I think now, like the gate is exploding open. You almost can't stop it at this point. But
Yeah.
there's people who are still like, it almost feels foolish to try to stop it for a lot, but it's still like some resistance. But I think the more you awaken people, the more they realize their purpose, their humanity. They realize what it is to be a human being. And all that's just like we try to stop forward human thought in that way. It's the strangest thing. Don't you want people to be well?
Right. Right.
This resistance
Exactly.
against wellness, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know that there's like any group like directing that per se, but these
Yeah,
systems are so self-perpetuating, they really just recreate themselves generation after
yeah,
generation. And yes, I think right now we're in a big moment of waking up. And a lot of
yeah,
folks are saying, okay, maybe the life that was laid out for me as like the way to be successful or the way to be happy is not what I want,
yeah.
or not the way for me. So yeah, I agree with you. We're in a very interesting moment in terms of consciousness.
Consciousness, exactly. And I mean, I have more friends now who are single or who don't ever want to get married,
Mm-hmm.
or, they maybe just want to have one kid or no kids. Like they're trying to alter the system. Like they're like, well, I don't have to do this. And I also can do this. That's a good thing too. But I want to have more choices. And I think when a person is more awake, they realize the choices they have in life and they're
Yeah.
not just stuck in whatever they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I agree very much. And again, like mindfully consumed, like with the intention of greater self-discovery, cannabis does a lot in that regard. It really can fuel that self-discovery that gets us on our own path.
Now, when you're speaking about this, do you ever run into resistance? Like someone actually comes up and tells you, or maybe online, like, hey, I don't know about this, what you're talking about. Like, why are you talking about this?
Yeah, online, it's the
Well,
internet, so there are trolls.
yeah, come on.
And there are people who don't understand it all. And I've been called names, like
Yeah.
drug addicts, like, really?
Wow. Okay. Well, you're like, I didn't know that. Mm,
And that was somebody who, didn't know me personally in any way, like saw probably one piece of content and was
yeah.
like, totally reactive. But but for the most part, I actually don't get a lot of negativity. And I think that part of that is that I lead with education and the why, right? Like this is how it's really helpful for me. I also talk a lot about well-being and wellness and
Yeah.
yoga and meditation and tools that I use and other plant medicines, not psychedelics. I mean, I do talk about psychedelics too, but I
Yeah.
also talk about, the herbs that I grow and the herbs that I
Yeah.
take as supplements and things like that. So there's that. And, I'm not like my brand, I guess, isn't blowing smoke clouds at the camera, for instance. That's out there. There's
I'm
some
sure it
tips.
is. Yeah, I have not
Oh yeah.
seen that. I'm sure it's out there.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of that content. And so, I don't know, maybe I don't attract as much of the hate because of that. But my account has been deleted 3 different times
Come
on
on.
Instagram. And I don't know and I've gotten it back each time, but I don't
Yeah.
know if it's the algorithm finding cannabis content and flagging me, or if it's an individual who is reporting my
Mm,
account, because that can happen too.
that's true.
Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if those accounts of people just blowing smoke if they get uh suspended too. It's like I mean,
Some do and some don't. It's just like there
see,
seems to be no rhyme or reason, like you said.
ah, man. What's the future content you want to talk about related to cannabis? Or what do you think? What are you mulling over? Like, how do you want to keep extending this in your discussions?
Yeah, so I was asked on an Orlando ABC affiliate like a month or two ago to talk about Canna Moms and the
Yeah.
whole movement. And I think that particular message still needs to get out there.
Mm,
Mom, it's okay for moms to responsibly consume cannabis. I think that, that message still is not really known. Um, but, aside from that and breaking down the stigmas, I want to keep educating people about all these alternative cannabinoids out there, because there's just, like I said, a lot that is new to the market, new to people's bodies even.
yeah.
And so I want people to be aware enough to responsibly consume there. And then of course, advocacy. I
Yeah.
want, anybody who is still in prison for nonviolent cannabis offenses to be released, so Biden's announcement was on the federal level, but most cannabis prisoners are state prison, in
Yeah.
state prisons. So that needs to happen. Expungement for those who are out, but still are suffering all the consequences of having been incarcerated, things like that. And I want the industry to offer an opportunity for small businesses and small entrepreneurs to actually make it. I don't want just the big players
Yeah.
to dominate.
That is such a common thing. Even like when all the psychedelic folks I talk to, they have the same exact thing. We don't want all the big players,
Yeah,
pharmaceutical companies to take over this industry.
right.
Just like things have always been, we want to have better access and more opportunities for smaller businesses and things of that nature. And there's a real fear there of
Mm-hmm.
that, so I think it's a wild time, honestly, because every time there's an election or something, there's always cannabis on someone's ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think what was the last one? I think it actually didn't go through. I can't remember what state it was. Um,
So, in the midterms, Maryland and Missouri went through.
yeah,
Hoda's didn't, and there was another big one that failed,
yeah,
and now I can't remember because yeah, I mean these bills are just like popping up constantly because
yeah,
sometimes they're doing it by voting by
right,
the voters, and sometimes legislators are doing it in their sessions. So yeah, Delaware just came online too, and of course New
mm,
York is the big
yeah,
one that was over a year ago, but
right.
they're starting up sales now.
What do you think? I mean, what has to be the tipping point for federal, like decriminalization or just making it legal? Does it have to be a certain amount of states, you think, or is like, what do you think that tipping point will be?
Well, if it's a certain amount of states, I feel like we should be there. We're
Should be
getting
there,
so
right? I mean,
close,
it's a
right?
lot already, actually. Come on.
It's a lot. It's around, around 22. Like the numbers always changing depends on,
Yeah,
sometimes things get caught up in the courts as well, but
yeah,
it's around 22 for adult use and it's like 38 for medical.
yeah,
And some of those medical programs are very expansive. Some of them are more restrictive. It just depends. I'm actually going to
yeah.
Oklahoma next month for a Canna Mom event, and it's
Wow, really?
yeah, I know.
It
It's
can't
a
be any
medical.
weed legally there, is there? I mean,
Oh no, there is. It's a
wow.
medical only state, but
Okay.
it's like you can get a card for a lot of things. And so it's
Yeah, it's easy,
really,
probably. Yeah.
yeah, it's very easy. It's been described as the Wild West of weed because there was no cap on the number of licenses, and people
Yeah.
just like flocked to Oklahoma to open up weed businesses. Right. And
It's
you'd never
funny.
think it,
No, I would never guess that. Like,
right?
wow,
I know.
that's amazing. I feel like it's close to a tipping point. I think it has to be. I mean, maybe a couple surprise states get in there or something at some point. Because it feels like it's not one side or the other. Like you have states that you would think, oh, this would never be recreational, and it is, and then you're like, wow, that's interesting. And then you have your typical, we knew it, type of thing. I
Yeah.
think it just feels like every cycle proves that this is kind of a losing battle for people against it. It's
Hmm.
like, what would you say we're doing here? Spend our time on other stuff. That's that's my main thing. When you said what's the priority, I'm like, yeah, but what is the priority? Like, to me, it's a priority, but it's like to spend so much time being against weed feels foolish to me. It's like, how about our healthcare system? You want to fix that? Like, can we spend more time on that? Like our
Yeah. And
guns, common sense gun law. Can we spend some time on that? Like,
please, I know.
please, like, why do we need to care about weed so much? It's like,
Yeah, and even in places where it's legal, it depends obviously state by state, but there are some places where it's legalized, but the joke is they treat it like plutonium, like any excess trim, any like,
yeah,
bit of flour has to be like weighed and accounted for. And, it's really, really extremely regulated in some places. And then in others, it's not. It's just such a wild
yeah.
moment.
I mean, it's not the nuclear codes here. I mean, I mean, it's just like literally just,
Yeah, and look who we gave those to.
Okay, I know how you feel about this. I see. I know, but see, this is the thing. It's like then our reputation and the whole thing, how we're viewed. It's just kind of like I think we just have to be more careful about how we go into things in the United States, and that includes all different areas. We need to have we kind of stop having this casual integrity. I feel like we have a lot of casual integrity in America. Like it's almost kind of like it's like there's not a lot of lines in the sand. It's like, well, whatever. Like, you know, societies that don't value wellness, that
Mm,
don't value some level of regulation or guardrails around thing tend to become very lazy and get destroyed by other places that outwork them and care about their citizens. We're on the cusp of that over time.
mm,
Like we're a little too leisure, in my opinion, on things. And you got to have a line in the sand on integrity on things. And we got to put away things that are just foolish,
mm.
that people have these old ideas and be like, it's okay to hang on to things that are valuable from the past, but not things that are clearly the information has changed.
Yeah, agree.
It's like, and I think we just the problem is in my opinion is that a lot of the minority loudmouths are the majority leaders in
Hmm.
our country, but a lot of the America has a very similar mindset. It's just they're not running the country, or they don't have power. So I feel like we have to have like we have to have a come to Jesus meeting about this stuff, man. It's like we need to have better people. And I would say this in my business is like we have bad messengers and bad messages,
Mm.
and we need to take hold of that message and have better messengers of exercise, health, and wellness. And okay, I went on a rant about that.
Well, it's important and it's
Yeah, I don't
it's part
know.
of, part of your worldview. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see, the funny thing is like I kind of get an idea about your worldview from some of the things, your nuggets you've dropped. And but most of the people I talk to, I don't know, and they feel very similar. It's not like I've colluded with them and go, yeah, you know what, we agree about the same thing. I have no clue when I talk to them, but they
Yeah.
feel very similar. Like, and so I just think it's definitely a minority narrative that has a majority, a megaphone
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
that. And hopefully we as a country like don't want that at some point.
Yeah, I agree. Like when we're fed up with the divisiveness and the
Yeah.
sort of lack of progress on important things. Like, I mean, we are such a big country. Like that
Yeah.
is part of the issue is like, the vast differences in experience and
Yeah.
I mean the urban rural
Yeah.
divide is big and
It's
it's
true.
there's just yeah it's so complex, but
It
I
is
agree with
complex.
you that extremists tend to somehow become the leaders.
I know because really solid, really well-meaning people, they see those jobs as like this is crazy. Like why would I want to participate in something like this? Also, it's not conducive for most people because of the monetary aspect of it is so overwhelming. The fundraising is very much geared towards people with lots of money already. And so it kind of cancels out most people who don't already have a lot of funds. But another thing, like who in their right mind wants to deal with all that on a regular basis? Like to be
Yeah,
miserable and deal with people yelling and shouting and all that, conflict all the time. Who wants conflict all the time in their life? Like,
I know,
I think
I certainly don't. I mean, I want to stand up for that, and I do stand up for the things that I believe in. And sometimes
right,
I got to take steps back to, be
right.
well.
Most definitely. Well,
Yeah.
Danielle, I always enjoy speaking with you. You have a great way of looking at things. So please tell everyone how they could connect with your book and all the experiences you have going on.
Yeah. So my website is daniellesimonebrand.com, and you can find some of my writing as well as links to my book and just various projects I'm working on. And at Danielle Simone Brand on Instagram as well. And if this is going to come out in the next several days, people can
Mhm.
still book the Columbia tour as well. Really, really looking forward to sharing that. And it's coming up really soon at the end of this month.
Or if it's coming out next week, early next week. So, I like to keep it relevant, and nice and timely for people. So, thank you so much for your time, Danielle, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Dr. D. I love talking to you too. And yeah, hope to do it again soon.
You got it.